In this lesson, I want to show you another graph that you can look at to see how to use chord progressions. One of my favorite graphs to look at when I'm talking about chord progressions is this graph here, because it's a holistic overview of all the chords in a specific key. Now I chose C major just to make it easy, but if you look at the left hand side of our chart, we have all the Roman numerals from 1 to the diminished 7. Now, all of the triads are going to be the first 3 notes of any of these Roman numerals. So the 1 chord, the first triad is going to be C, E, and G. For the 2 chord, that triad would be D, F, and A. And for the 3 chord, it would be E, G, and B, and so on and so forth. Now, if you want to add a 7th to it, this is a nice way to see. You can just add that B to the triad, which would make it a 7th. Of course, if you added a D, you'd add the 9th. If you added this F, it would be an 11th. And of course, if you add that A, it would be the 13th. And that's true for any of these chords. So if you take the 5 chord, and let's say we wanted to add a 13th to our 5 chord, we would take this triad and we would add this E here to the bottom triad, and that would make our 5 chord with an added 13. So this is a really fun way, an easy way to look at all of the triads and the extensions with in one particular key. Now, in terms of a chord progression, you can also see, like I was saying in previous videos, you can see that some of these chords are a little bit closer, or they share some notes. And that way, if you choose those notes or those chords in a progression, it's not going to feel like you have motion. And in a chord progression, of course, we want to have motion. So if we look at the first chord, the 1 chord, and the 3 chord, and the 5 chord, we could see that in the 1 and the 3 chord, they share these 2 notes in the triad, of course. And then from the 3 to the 5 chord, they're going to share these 2 notes. So if we go from a 1 chord to a 3 chord to a 5 chord, we're not going to really feel like there's any motion, because we're sharing so many notes. And that's true if we go from a 2 to a 4 chord to a 6 chord. We're going to have a lot of shared notes. So again, it's going to feel like there's not really a lot of motion. Let's see, 2, 4, and 6, because from the 2 chord, we have these 3 notes, D, F, and A. For the 4 chord, we have F, A, and C. And for the 6 chord, we have A, C, and E. So again, we're sharing these 2 notes from the 2 to the 4 chord. And of course, we're sharing A and C from the 4 to the 6 chord. So it doesn't feel like there's a really good progression. It doesn't feel like there's any motion happening in our chord progression. So in order to have a really good chord progression, let's say we don't want to use a graph that's going to just tell us what a good chord progression is. What we want to look at as a general rule of thumb is we want our chord progressions to share as few notes as possible. So if I start with 1, my chord is going to be C, E, and G, and of course that's without any of the extensions from the 7th, the 9th, 11th, or 13th. So just my standard triad is going to be C, E, and G. Now I could use anything or any next chord that has a D or an F or an A or a B. So that means I can easily go to a 2 chord. I can go to, what other chords would be really good? I can go to a 7 diminished chord. That would be another far away chord. Now, of course, I can go to the 4 chord. Even though it shares C, it still has 2 notes that are not in common. So if it has only 1 note in common, that's all right. Now, if I were to start, of course, on a different chord, let's say I were to start on a 5 chord, and we take a look at our 5 chord, which has G, B, and D. Now, if I have G, B, and D, now my next chord, I'm not going to want to go to a 3 chord because I'm going to share those 2 notes. So let's not do 3. And I'm not going to want to go probably to a 7 diminished chord, because we're also going to share 2 notes. So from the 5 chord, if we eliminate the 3 and the 7, that means we can either go to a 6 chord, which would be a really good option. We could go to the 4 chord, which would be a really good option. Or we could go to the 2 chord. Now the 2 chord, of course, is going to share the D, right? So it's not going to be as strong of a progression. Or what's most common from a 5 is the 5 oftentimes will lead back to 1. Now, of course, the 5 chord and the 1 chord share 1 note, which is this G. But that's all right, because again, one note that's shared is okay. We just want to avoid two notes being shared. So from the 5, you can go back to the 1, you can easily go to the 2, you can go to the 4 or the 6, but we want to avoid sharing two notes, which would mean we wouldn't want to go to the 7 diminished chord, or we wouldn't want to go to the 3 chord. Now, of course, you'll find in some songs that we do have those chord progressions, but what does that mean? Well, we're not going to feel the motion from one chord to the next. It's going to sound like it's just a substitution. So the 5 and the 7 are going to sound like it's the same chord. They're going to easily be substituted. The 2 and the 4 are going to be able to substitute pretty easily. 4 and the 6, you're going to substitute pretty easily. So any chord that is going to share two notes is going to be easy to substitute. So you can use those if you need a chord substitution, or if you want to make a really good progression, try to find chords that don't have any shared notes. All right. Hope this was helpful. Take a second to make as many chord progressions as you can, and of course find your favorite chord progressions and then use those over and over and over again until you get really familiar with it. Have fun with it this week.